Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life. Not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at Facebook.com/Virtual Memories Show, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please go to the iTunes store, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for us. Maybe that'll inspire Apple to promote us a little. And of course, you can always promote us by telling people about the podcast on social media or however else you publicize the things you like. You can support the Virtual Memories Show and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSpod and set up your level of support. You'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. All right, I have been doing some heavy lifting today, emotionally and physically, so I sound a little rough. Sorry. If it's any consolation, it's not going to get any easier from here on. But this past weekend was pretty good for me. We had the MoCA Festival, it's a cartooning event in New York City, and I got to moderate a live panel with Roz Chast, one of my favorite guests and the great New Yorker cartoonist, and we recorded that for an upcoming episode of the show. It was Roz, so it was magic. We had a great time. I also wound up getting a one-on-one with one of the greatest living cartoonists. It came together very quickly, so I didn't have time to prepare, but that was probably for the best. Jaime Hernandez. We had an amazing circumstance that got us together, so I was really happy to get to sit down with him. That's a fun conversation. That one's going to come next week. I also had lots of other good, just side conversations with cartoonist pals and artists and other guys I know at MoCA, and that was just kind of nice. I like doing that every year, where I just get to, shoot the breeze with people I got to talk with before. I also kind of lined up some new guests, like, they're both animation people, J.J. Settlemeyer and Bill Plimpton. Bill was exhibiting at MoCA, and I pitched him. He sounded up for it. And J.J., who I'd been turned on to a while back, attended the Roz Chast panel and introduced himself by Facebook message after. So we're going to try and get something together in the next couple of weeks. For this week, your guest is Dean Haspiel, also known as Dino. Dino is a cartoonist. He works in a different tradition than the guys I usually record with. He's not as hardcore arts indie comics as a Jaime Hernandez, for example. He's done a bunch of work for mainstream publishers, and he has a really Jack Kirby-esque style of cartooning and a love of superheroes. He reached out a few weeks ago because he loved the episode that I did with Howard Chaykin last year. He worked in Howard's studio when he was a kid, which we get into as these stories unfold. Now, coincidentally, I was just thinking of hitting Dino up a couple of days earlier to see if he could connect me with Jonathan Ames. I knew he and Ames were pals, and he collaborated with Ames on the graphic novel The Alcoholic, which is having a 10th anniversary reissue later this year. Anyway, Dino connected me with Ames, and you got to hear the fruits of that conversation last week. And then Dino and I sat down the day after that episode to talk about his life, his comics, and his new role as a playwright. See, the reason we're airing this one right now, and I'm not taking time off and letting my voice recover, is because Dino has a new play debuting this very week. It's called The Last Bar at the End of the World. It's going to be running for 1 week, April 10th through 15th, 2018, for you time travelers, at Urban Stages Theater on West 30th Street in New York City. It'll feature performances from Philip Cruz, Tariq Davis, Lex Friedman, Seth Gilliam, Christopher Lee, Edward Miller, Alyssa Simon, Anna Stefanik, and Stoya. Now you can order tickets for it at lastbar.brownpapertickets.com. And that is the only site I have for this besides Dean's own website, deanhaspiel.com. But I'll give you the URL for that at the end of the show. Now, the caveats are it was kind of nightmarish getting out to Dean's place in Carroll Gardens. I was at a brunch for Chip Delaney on Easter Sunday, and it took me a long time to get out there. The subways were a nightmare. I was in the midst of a head cold, so my voice was kind of meh. Also, we used handheld mics instead of the tabletop tripods, and Dean's voice is louder than mine. I tried to balance that. Anyway, you're going to hear the fruits of this stuff, too. It's a fun conversation. Now, here's Dean's bio. Emmy and Ringo Award winner Dean Haspiel has created the comic characters Billy Dogma and the Red Hook. He illustrated HBO's Bored to Death, is a Yaddo Fellow, a playwright, and helped pioneer personal webcomics. Dino has written, drawn, and collaborated on many superheroes and literary graphic novels, including The Quitter with Harvey Pekar and The Alcoholic with Jonathan Ames. For DC Vertigo, Marvel, Archie, IDW, Dark Horse, Heavy Metal, Line Webtoons, and more. The Last Bar at the End of the World is Dean's third play, sharing a universe with his two other plays, Switch to Kill and Harakiri Kane. And now, the Virtual Memories Conversation with Dean Haspiel. When I got to CXC, Pete Bagg and I were talking. We were going to record a one-on-one follow-up. We were shooting the breeze the night before pretty intensely, and he was like, "What? The guy who was going to do my thing bailed, and Gary was going to fill in, but why don't you just interview me live instead, and we'll record that and do it."
That's great.
It's like, if Gary doesn't mind, that's cool. And the funny thing was, I became Bagg's show buddy that event, because on the show floor, like the next day, he's sitting there by himself and had a few moments alone. I sat down with him to ask him something. I'm like, I can split. I don't want to eat up. He's like, no, it's cool shooting the breeze with you. Why don't we just hang out?
Yeah.
So one fan came up and asked him to do an illustration of a baseball player, favorite Seattle Mariner.
Okay.
And Baggs stuck trying to figure out, and eventually the two of them hit on Randy Johnson, the big gawky Ichabod Crane looking guy.
Sure.
At which point the guy leaves, and Pete and I sit there trying to figure out what a Pete Bagg drawing of Randy Johnson would look like. And I'm like, this is heaven.
That is such a great process moment, and it's funny because I remember I did a signing at JHU Comics a year or two ago, and I forget what the comic was, but people were coming up and they would look at the comic, but they had the blank cover. There's this whole blank cover phenomenon happening where they like task you to draw something, whether it's the character of the book or they're like, I don't care. And then something was about wrestling. There was a lot of wrestling happening.
Okay.
And I don't watch wrestling. And they were like, could you draw this character or that character? And after I was like, could you just buy the comic that we're here for? I can draw that character, because now I have to figure out some stuff that and I'm not charging because it's like a sign, and after a while it becomes too much, know? And so, anyway, that's just me griping.
No, but that's the nature of this stuff. When people start asking for more than, they should be entitled to.
And well, speaking of entitled, that's what's happened now in comics is that people feel entitled to the characters and their destination and their destiny. Yeah. So you cannot like what a creative team is doing, but you can't tell them what to do. The only thing you can do is not buy it. Right. And let sales dictate whether or not you're doing well or not. And even then, it doesn't mean it wasn't good. It just means that it didn't pop or something, right? So, but now we have people going online, with outrage towards how could you do this to, when Captain America was a Nazi? It's like, it's a comic book. He's not going to be a Nazi at some point, and we're going to find out why, and yet it worked. It got people to go, oh my God, did you hear about Captain America? He's a Nazi. And just like, I'm so pissed off. How could they do that? Well, they can because it's fantasy, and if it's a well done story, it'll be a nice twist and surprise. And how most of our stories are for television, comics, and everything else, and I just don't understand how readers or certain readers don't understand that part, you cannot buy it and not like it, but you can't go and tell people that they can't do it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Howard Chaykin, perfect example, Divided States of Hysteria, right? They were basically telling him, or certain people were saying, you're not allowed to make this comic, Howard. And it wasn't Spider-Man or Captain America. It was his own creation. Yeah. And they were saying, you can't do this, you know? And again, get to the end of the story. There's a purpose here. There's a reason for what he's doing.
It goes back, and we're recording, but we'll make some sort of fake intro about it. Yeah. Although this seems like a perfectly good place to dive in. You may not remember, when Last Temptation of Christ came out, and we're going to protest, we're going to march, blah, blah, blah. Have you seen the movie? No, but it's blasphemous.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, but, you know, and I know it's a little different saying Christ is a character in somebody's fictional creation.
Sure.
It's just us.
Yeah.
And it's Easter. But
that's right. And it's Easter.
But yeah, there's that sense of, you know.
The original Walking Dead character, right? Yeah. Okay.
Although Lazarus, I guess, but, you know, still. That sense of, you know, I don't need to see the artwork. I just need to tell people what they can do and can't do about it.
If you're going to... we all knee jerk react. That's just natural. You know, you knee jerk react walking down the street when you see somebody and, you know, you don't like the way they look or something, right? But like, you can't like have a critical thought without actually diving into the material, you know? So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Speaking of, where'd you start in comics as a reader before becoming your whole evolution in comics?
Sure. I mean, I grew up in the Upper West Side at 79th Street and Broadway, and there was
Zabar's,
H&H Bagels, La Caridad, and and basically there was two newsstands. One was across the street was a church that's still there now today, which when I thought about it recently, that was my church. I'm not a religious person, but comics became my church, you know, in a lot of ways. So there's this newsstand that sells Marvel and DC and Archie comics and Heavy Metal magazine. And then there's this beautiful church behind it. And I never made that connection until just recently. Anyway, and then on my corner across the street was another a newsstand, but they didn't have as many comics. So it was like going to a comic shop across the street. And when I discovered that it was like whatever it was back then, whether it was a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whenever comics came out that week, I would make sure to get there right away because, you know, I didn't know what was coming out. I didn't know, like,
we didn't have all the guides and all this.
None of that stuff. You just had to show up, you know? And so I would read Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, a lot more Marvel than DC, to be honest. I might have read some Batman, but that was also during a time when I was watching the Batman TV show, and I thought Batman was corny.
Yeah.
You know?
And 70s DC was not good.
Right. It wasn't that good.
In comparison to the Fantastic Four stuff. Or Marvel stuff.
What was good would be like Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams' Green Lantern, Green Arrow comics, but I think I was a little older. I mean, that was older comics for me. But like, I turned on to Marvel 2-in-1. I think I like Green Lantern out of all the DC comics as well. So anyway, there's a handful of comics that I'm reading and collecting on a regular basis. And then you discover comic shops. Wait, what? There are comic shops where they specifically sell these things?
Right.
And I think my first comic shop might have been West Side Comics at like 86th Street or something like that in the Upper West Side, where one day I remember walking in the store with my best friend Mike, and there's Mark Hamill. And I was like, and he's flipping through a bunch of comics. He's getting a stack. I'm like, what? He reads comic books? And he was pushing a stroller with a little baby in it, you know, his child. And I was just like ogling him, just like, you know, I was huge Star Wars fans, like most people were back then and are today probably. And his child drops its toy, and I say it's in child because I don't know if it was a boy or a girl. And Mark didn't see this happen. And my best friend Mike looks at the kid and says, use the force, like to pick it back up. And he said it loud enough that Mark turned around and I just left the store. I just couldn't deal. But anyway, it was really funny. And so we go to discover comic book shops, and then there was Funny Business. The owner, Roger, was I think a psychotherapist who ran a comic shop and smoked cigars. So all the comics smelled like cigars. And I think that was my first pull list where like you could actually, you know, specify what you want.
Yeah.
And then Bill Mantlo was a good friend of the store and Rogers, and he used to shop there all the time until his accident. I don't know if you know what happened to Bill. He's the creator of Rocket Raccoon, and he wrote Micronauts and ROM and Hulk. He was the writer of the Hulk comics that I would read with Sal Buscema drawing. So yeah, I grew up, seeking these things on a regular basis. But I do kind of recall that at age 12, I decided that I wanted to dedicate my life to one day creating and making comics and being part of this business. So I became otherwise unemployable because I knew what I wanted to do.
Right.
So every job I ever got after that would be like, okay, I'm just doing this for a little while. It's a temporary thing until I get through to the, being a freelancer like I am today. The first official cartoonist I ever met, I was working in the candy store where I lived, in the corner of where I lived at 79th and Broadway. And I think I was 16 or 15, probably 16 years old. And there was this short Asian man would walk in with a portfolio case. And, after a while, I was doing the lotto machine. They were selling candy and cigars, all this stuff. It was run by this old Jewish couple. And finally, I just said, what's in that portfolio of yours? What do you do? And he's like, oh, I'm a letterer of comics. And I was like, what? And he opened up his case, and there was strips of Dondi. I think I remember Prince Valiant even, or something like that. Like he had different comics he was doing, and it was Ben Oda. And Ben Oda was a letterer back in the day. And that was my first official, introduction to actually a person, who made these things. Because I remember one time telling someone when I was younger, when they ask you, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I was like, I want to be a cartoonist. And that person said, wait, people make those things? Because they just assumed it was like a machine cranking these things out. And in a way, there was a machine system in place for that kind of, mentality. But yeah, no, my dream was to one day pencil the Fantastic Four. That was it. I was done after that. And of course, I wasn't going down that road because I wasn't good enough. And then I started being introduced to indie comics. I discovered this store called Soho Zat down in Soho. And they sold like lots of records and ephemera and not mainstream comics, but alternative comics. And I discovered Harvey Picar's American Splendor and Chester Brown's Yummy Fur. And what that did to me is it blew my mind because I thought I would just draw the FF one day or a superhero comic that a company, owned. And then I was being introduced to people who own their own characters. Like Chester Brown could create his own universe, okay? Or Harvey Picar was writing about his own life. So I was like, wait, you can do anything in comics? So that kind of blew my mind. And of course, and one of the first comics I ever bought was Star Wars, okay? Before the movie came out.
Right.
And I don't know, 9 years later, I'd be Howard Chaykin's assistant on American Flag, And then later on, a little bit after that, I'd be drawing a couple American Splendor stories and then bringing Harvey over to Vertigo DC to do his origin story, The Quitter, and then bringing the American Splendor series over to DC as well. So, I mean, of course, I'm jumping, ahead, but my introduction to comics was a newsstand, back when we had newsstands, and I think we officially still do, but they're sparse.
Yeah.
And do they even carry comic books?
No one
I
has
don't know.
comics. I was passing an old stationer's where I used to buy comics when I was a kid and realized it's just going to be a couple of magazines and candy and, greeting cards, etc. But the thing where we would just buy 35-cent comics off the rack. Yep. That world's gone.
That world's gone. I remember 7-Elevens when you go on a road trip or you go to the Stuckies or whatever it was that would have like a little section. And again, it was the standard stuff like Spider-Man, Batman type thing, But at least they were there. Yeah. They were there. And that's how you grow the fan base, is to have that, because when you're on the road, especially, and you're getting a little bored and you need something to do, comic books are perfect, especially for the kids in the backseat of the car kind of thing,
We would grab a stack of them at home before the Thanksgiving drive from New Jersey down to Florida for
There you go.
Disney World. And it was just, rolling through FFs, X-Men, et cetera.
So you did read, like, I for some reason I got the impression that
I'm snooty and highbrow?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
But
I was raised
maybe that evolved
comics.
From...
Yeah, I was superhero comics, the gateway to indie comics for me. I'd seen a little stuff in the late 80s in bookstores when Pantheon was putting out some of the raw stuff. Okay. But really, freshman year of college, drummer dude from Texas... Man, you got to read this comic, Love and Rockets, man. Boy. And that was, I'd never look back.
See, that blew your mind.
And the great moment came a year or two ago, decades later. I'm sitting at dinner with Beto Hernandez, who turns to me suddenly and says, Captain America, Civil War, what did you make of it? And I'm sitting with him and his brother. I said, well, dude, I don't read superhero comics because of you and your brother. I stopped that, pretty much.
So the Hernandez brothers ruined superhero comics for you.
Yeah. Now the funny thing was when I recorded with your employer, your former employer, Howard Chaykin, we were talking about the Bros, and he asked me, their superhero thing, is that like ironic, or do they really dig superheroes? I'm like, no, Howard, they really dig superheroes. There's not them being, disingenuous.
I believe that because I think it comes out in their work.
Yeah. You just didn't know because he had too casual a connection with their stuff. But I'd said, no, I've between their work and talking to them, they legit. Sure. He wasn't asking about the Captain America thing to be funny.
Right.
He really wanted to know what I thought of the Marvel movie because he had strong opinions about it.
Right.
Jaime loves the Project Pegasus story from Marvel 2-1.
I have that right over there, a collection. Yeah. I also got them when they came out.
Right.
In fact, the collection just came out recently of it again.
I will tell you where I bought the newsstand copies in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. I remember buying them at this one sweet shop.
Mark Grunwald, right? I think wrote those.
And Perez was drawing them.
Perez, and then they had, I think, Ron Wilson, because that was also in the Marvel 2-1, but that might have been, and then I feel like, and I didn't know this until recently, so there's Project Pegasus in Marvel 2-1, but then I think it did extend out to other, Avengers or something.
They did more with Stingray and characters like that. Yeah. We can nerd the fuck out pretty well. I've had friends, it's the same thing, I've had guests who, gee, Gil, I thought you were this highbrow snob because you portray yourself as a highbrow snob. But honestly, my education started with those early Fantastic Fours, reading the Cockrum and Claremont, and then the Byrne and Claremont X-Men.
Yep.
Elektra getting killed in Daredevil when I was 10. Things like that. Those were the formative comics of my youth.
Well, so the 80s, even though I technically was probably reading comics in the 70s, because I was born in 67. So
I was 71. So
you're in 71. So 70s, I'm definitely looking at some comic books, but I'm collecting them in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. But there was this second Marvel resurgence. So if 1961 to 62 was when it all kind of happened, they unfurled, with FF and Spider-Man, and then Hulk, Iron Man, Avengers, and all that stuff. Nick Fury, and then so they had a decade of that kind of stuff. And then the 70s come and it gets a little funky. Stan Lee's going to Hollywood to try and make movies. Jack Kirby just split because he's disgruntled to go to DC. And then so you have Englehart and Jim Starlin, and you get in a little psychedelic, right, in the 70s. But the 80s kind of became another version of the 60s Marvel with John Byrne and, Claremont and X-Men, and then John Byrne going off to do FF and the other books he did. You had Simonson on Thor, which I worked on. Yeah. Miller on Daredevil, and I'm trying to think, there was there was a beautiful trifecta of that kind of stuff happening. So it was almost like a rebirth, as it were, of the coda.
Although those guys were largely hearkening back.
Especially Byrne.
Byrne's FF was a Jack Kirby pastiche in a lot of respects. I don't mean it in a bad way, but they were tributes to the Kirby.
I don't know if I was listening. If you did an interview or somebody did an interview where they were saying that they were hanging out with Frank Miller back in the day.
No, I've met Miller once, and it's a pretty funny circumstance, which I'll fill you in on.
Tell me about that. So, but real quick, so they'd be all hanging out, and he'd be like, "I got to go and watch Hill Street Blues tonight so I can write the next Daredevil."
Yeah, and again, that's the same thing. I was going to go with Scorsese also. You get the Mean Streets as opposed to a Taxi Driver vibe. But
totally.
And then Simonson was bringing there was some Kirby aspect, which you have to do anytime you're doing Thor, but also his strong science fiction background, I think, really plays into it. No, I met Frank Miller without realizing he was Frank for the first maybe 15 minutes or so that we were talking. We were at a party at Mia Wolf's place back when she lived in Tribeca, and we went out to get some beer for the party. He introduced himself as Frank, and it was January. Cold, complained about, we griped about the cold, but he said it's a lot worse. I'm from Vermont. It's pretty bad. Right. I still don't make the connection. And then when we're back in the house, he mentions his wife, Lynn, and that was my moment of, by Frank, you mean Frank Miller? He's like, yes, and I really enjoyed your work over the years, sir. And that was, where I left it pretty much. I'm hoping to get him on at some point.
But, where was he at at that point?
This would have been 2004. So he's already post 9/11 and heading in his direction. He'd already done 300.
Got it.
I'm pretty sure.
Got it.
But yeah, he was and his health was fine at that point.
Sure.
But I am hoping to connect with him at some point. Although, like we've said, I'm this highbrow, snooty guy, so I'm supposed to not live up to my mainstream comics upbringing. Which is why I made the joke when I recorded with Karen Green when she said her first big score for the comics collection she did at Columbia was Chris Claremont's Notebooks. Oh. And I said, were they really overwritten, or did Tom Orzechowski redraw them in his full letter? And she just, you're really that much of a nerd? I'm like, yeah.
That's
I'm
that funny. Bad, so. I actually, I went to New York Comic Con, the most recent one, and I saw Claremont in Artist Alley. And I went up to him, and we had been very friendly. I had seen him at Pacificana, which is like this beautiful dim sum place in Chinatown, Brooklyn, and we've done panels together and lots of stuff. And he said I said, what are you doing these days? He's like, I'm teaching comic book writing. I said, what do you teach him? How to overwrite? And he said, fuck you.
But that's when you look at those comics of our youth, and it's like, my God, there's no room for the characters. There's word balloons, and then the captions above it, they're driving people out of the picture.
But he was one of the better ones at it.
Oh,
Stan Lee was good at that too.
The stories were still great.
Yeah.
But, he did kind of overwrite.
He did overwrite a little bit.
But again, I still think there's a degree that I'm sure he trusted Byrne as an artist.
Right.
But you have to know what to put in and what to take
exactly.
out. That's
exactly. But maybe they were kind of voguing together. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so I remember the first time I met Frank Miller real quick was my good friend Larry O'Neill, Danny O'Neill's son, who I had befriended in high school. And we actually both became assistants to Howard Chaykin at Upstart Studios in our senior year of high school. And at one point, we were walking down like Lower East Side or something like that, and Frank Miller walking up the street, and Larry goes, Frank. And I'm like, oh, snap, I'm about to meet Frank Miller, right? So we're talking, and I think Frank was asking like Larry to babysit his cat or something like that because he was going out of town. And then we were talking movies, and apparently he had like a system called the V system. And we would be talking about movies, and he was talking about this new movie he had just seen that he loved a lot. And he gave it 3 V's, and that was like his highest that you could give. And V stood for violence. And it was a movie that originally was either based on a novel that the writer, I think, wrote and has the best title. Originally, it was called Twinkle, Twinkle, Killer Kane, written by William Peter Blatty, who wrote The Exorcist. Mm-hmm. And then he changed it to, I guess, when they made the movie, to the 9th Configuration. Have you ever heard this movie? I've heard the
title, but I've never seen it.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And Blatty also went on to write and direct Exorcist 3. Have you seen that?
The one with Patrick Ewing?
Patrick
as the Angel of Death?
Yes.
No, I've never seen it, but I know he's in it as the Angel of Death.
So, it is fantastic. Cool. The second movie blows, but everyone knows that. The third movie is as probably good as the first one. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big Friedkin fan, William Friedkin.
Yeah.
And if we talk a little bit about theater, I can talk about Tracy Letts a little bit. That Friedkin directed 2 plays of his in the movies, but he maintains that The Exorcist is not a horror film, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And he goes into a whole thing about it. And I'm like, yeah, of course it's not a horror film, William Friedkin. What are you talking about?
After all, you did this.
You made it. That's right.
So tell me the experience of being working with a cartoonist like Howard Chaykin when you're still in high school, and how that began, and then, how
you would think it's intimidating because, especially as a budding cartoonist who just doesn't have the chops yet. I don't even know if I have the chops today, to be honest, but I just do it.
I ask you that later.
Oh, so, thank you. Yeah. You force yourself through it, because in a way, I don't know what my art looks like because I call it deadline art. Given the time to draw a page, would I take a year? No, but I don't even know if I wanted to see that page, if it took me a year either, right. So I like that there's a clock attached to my drawing because it doesn't, then I can blame it on the clock, whatever I produce. And because also, as beautifully as a lot of illustrators can draw, and I'm not one of them, I'm drawing story is what I decided. And that is what comics are, and sometimes I've thought, well, if you're turning pages and you're, getting inside the story and suddenly you stop because you're ogling at how beautiful that was rendered, that drawing. I feel like that actually does a disservice to the comic story.
It varies. I've been rereading a ton of old Hellboys, and there are moments where Mignola just freezes you. With certain designs and certain ways he lays stuff out.
Sure,
but I think within the construct of the type of story he's telling, that works. But yeah, I can understand where you're coming from. If something is overdone,
overdone because again they're
Baroque.
They're also trying to sell that page a little bit more than the other pages, kind of thing, and that's what it feels like sometimes. Whereas Mignola, who I just saw the show at Society of Illustrators, which is again, on the one hand, it can feel intimidating, but it's so enthralling and encouraging. It's illuminating. It makes you want to go draw, not like him because you can't.
Yeah.
But the one takeaway I did get from that show, and again, things click in later sometimes, is of course, if you read the comics, he's been doing it all along, but he found his own coda, his own signature style, right? And he had to arrive at that. He had to break some stuff to get there, you know? And I think that's what a lot of auteur artists are trying to arrive at, is that shorthand, that that signature, that calligraphy that you're showing stories in. So what it did is it made me think about, well, where can I go? What can I lose, and what can I add to what I'm doing these days, so that I can get to a better space? What do they say about style? That style's actually what happens to you when you finally give up on trying to copy the people that you admire. Something like that. Yeah. I'm not putting it in the right way, but going back to Chaykin, so we have this opportunity, and I think it was through Larry O'Neill that his dad Denny, who was editing either Marvel or DC at the time, I don't remember, got wind that Howard Chaykin needed a new assistant, and so Larry started working with Howard in a room that was with Simonson and Jim Sherman. Just the three of those guys. And previously that room also occupied, if I'm correct, Jim Starlin, Frank Miller. Yeah. And maybe a couple other guys.
Yeah, when I was researching Chaykin, I remember all of them came up as a single studio. Like a single bunch of guys in the studio together.
And then down the hall, Bill Sienkiewicz, Dennis, and I always get this wrong. Is it Cohen?
Yeah, we'll go with Cohen.
Cohen and Michael Davis set up shop in this other kind of office space. And then Bill decided he wanted an assistant. So, Larry told me about it. I went and met Bill, and I became his assistant. So every 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, after high school around 3:00, me and Larry would grab a slice of pizza, hop on to the subway, go down to the Garment District around 28th Street, walk over and work for 3 or 4 hours with these guys in separate rooms. But then little by small, Bill started to not come in as much because I think he was either traveling from Connecticut or moving to Connecticut. Something was going on. But he was working on New Mutants, which I got to do backgrounds on that. And then Elektra Assassin. And he was working on the first issue when he finally just had to split. Dennis Cowan was working on Vigilante, and I think V, the TV show, comic book series. Yeah. And Michael Davis, I believe, was working on a comic about aliens or some alien thing for either Epic or something like that. And it was a really good parlay and a really amazing time. And one day I'm looking at Bill, and he's struggling with what he needs to do on this page of Elektra Assassin, and she is supposed to have a bruise on her face. And he's trying to find the right color, and he can't figure it out. And I see him look over at his tea bag, and he looks at it, and he picks it up, and he starts dabbing the art with his tea bag. And I saw him just this satisfied smile go over his face. I was like, wow. Not only can comics be about anything, but you can use anything to make comics, And then, of course, I would also hang out with Howard and Walt and those guys. And eventually Howard brought me on as a second assistant. And then Walter would also use me as well to help out with those were the Thor Frog issues, I remember. Mm-hmm. And then American Flag, and then maybe a couple of the little other projects. And that's where I got introduced to Akira, because it hadn't come out yet in America.
Oh, yeah, it was like 88 when Epic started doing the adaptation.
So, but they were getting the actual Japanese phone book manga type, things. So I didn't know what they were saying, but they were amazing to look at, and other comics. And Howard also turned me on to Jim Thompson, the novelist, and I started reading a lot of those books, like The Killer Inside Me, Pop 1280. But the other thing is that they would listen to Warren Zevon and, oh God, who was the other one? Astral Planes or Astral Works or something.
More.
Yeah. It's
Van Morrison.
Van Morrison.
Yeah.
And that just wasn't my bag, man.
Right.
Like, and did he tell you the story about what they did to me?
No.
So, they encouraged me to bring in one song that I could occasionally play when they gave me the nod. And I'm the biggest Prince fan, right? So I bring in Prince's, either When Doves Cry or one of those singles, right? And it's a 45. And I'm like, you know, once in a while they let me play my little Prince to get my 5 minutes in or whatever. And whatever, I didn't think about it too much. So one day, Howard suggests, hey, D, why don't you put on that Prince song you love so much? I was like, okay. But it was weird because it came from them versus me going, let me play my song now, kind of thing. So it came from them, and I go over to the record player, I put it on, I sit back down, I'm starting to draw some American flag stuff, and I suddenly hear like Walter's chair just kind of like push back forcefully. And he stands up and he starts to get really mad. Now, if you know Walter Simonson, he's basically, I used to call him the Mr. Rogers neighborhood of comics. He's just the nicest guy.
Yeah.
And suddenly he's exploding and freaking out. And I'd never heard or seen this kind of rage come out of him before. And it was palpable. It was intense. And I'm like, yo, what is going on? And he's like, Dean, I fucking hate this song. Why'd you put this on? And I look over to like Howard and Larry O'Neill to anchor me, to kind of like, what's going on? And I noticed that their faces are pressed up against the art tables. It occurred to me later they were stifling laughing, okay? But I didn't understand what was happening. And I got into this weird fugue state. And I look over at Walter, who like comes over around the corner from his art table. He goes over to the record player, and he pulls the handle and scratches the entire record across, picks up the record, and smashes it in his hands, screaming at me, telling me how much he hates this.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do. I just turned back around and I'm staring at the wall. I have no friends. I'm all alone right now. And then Walt screams, "Look at me. I have something for you. You better turn around and look at me." And he pulls out his portfolio case and he whips out a 12-inch version of the record he just destroyed. And everyone starts cracking up. I've been pranked. And even though I was terrified, I felt like that was the moment where I was sanctioned.
Yeah, I'm one of them.
I've been hazed.
Yeah.
I'm now one of them. So yeah, that was a really, and I think I was 17 going on 18 kind of thing. And it was a really beautiful moment and something I cherish because, you know, they went out of their way to bring that kind of like emotional, I have a certain PTSD now from it, but
I can't listen to the song ever again.
I can't ever listen to that song. That's right. Without screams in the back of Walter screaming in the back of my head. But that was a really beautiful time. But I went a long way to say that like as much as working with those guys should have been as intimidating as it could have been. Mm-hmm. They were open. They were great teachers. In fact, I do recall that even though I went to music and art then in my senior year became LaGuardia High School. They didn't teach comics. They didn't encourage comics. There was a lot of budding cartoonists at that school, but there was no teachers there teaching you how to use a ruler even. Yeah. And I would learn how to use a ruler from Howard Chaykin. You know, I learned a little bit about perspective from those cartoonists, you know. I learned how to show a story and think in pictures, like, you know, how to move, you know, something along. Yeah. And so many other skill sets. I learned what an inset was supposed to do because of Howard. Right. You know? And so
he was king of those.
And he's the king. So like 1985 was probably the most knowledge I've ever learned about comics in that year.
Do you think comics courses, do you think comics studies is as worthwhile as the experience you gain? Because Dave McKean, when I recorded with him, was like, I think it's useless. I think the way to learn how to make comics is to make comics.
I think learning how to make anything is by making it. Like, you know, they say, you want to be a writer? Write. You know, do you want to sing songs? Sing, you know, that kind of thing. Or tell comedy, you got to go out and tell jokes in front of people, you know, especially communication arts. I will say that nothing beats the experience of having to prove yourself in front of someone, right? But like, is there a merit to studying and going to comic book college, which I never had? Yeah. You know, it's what's the way I think about it is like, if I went to comics college, what what kind of comics would I be doing? How would I be producing comics? Would it have changed my way? I don't know. I can't say that there's no value to it, you know? I also don't know what they teach. Do they teach storytelling? Is there inking class? Why do we have inking anymore if ink doesn't matter? Like, if you have digital now, are they doing webcomic? Like, all kinds of stuff like that. I do know this. When I went to college, and I never got to my senior year because I couldn't afford it anymore, but I do think that in your senior year, one of the things they should teach you is how to look at your art as a business if you want to make money at it, right? So it's not just about your senior thesis and you walk out the door like a lot of my film friends, and then you become a PA for 4 years.
Right.
You know, when you walked out the door thinking, I'm a writer-director, and now your crew pulling cables, which, by the way, PAs are a godsend, because I had to be one and I sucked at it because my ego kept saying, I'm a director, I'm a filmmaker. There's no way I should be, you know, at 4 a.m. in the middle of the Brooklyn Bridge holding cable wires. Why am I doing this for $50? You know, I think the movie was If Lucy Fell or something like that. Yeah. So I did a bunch of this, so I've experienced it. But then when you meet a PA that's egoless, does the job, knows how to innovate, and like, they are so essential, you know. But anyway, people like me with my ego, I want to tell stories. Yeah. You know, hey, I need to make my stories.
I'm really here to direct.
That's right. Yeah. So, but wait, now I went off the rails.
The value of an education versus
the value of an education
experience.
There's got to be a lot of value in it.
Yeah. And it's something that's recorded before this. He'll be posting after you. Stephen Heller, the graphic design guru at SVA, one of the MFA programs he designed is called The Designer as Entrepreneur. Okay. So, with the idea that design does not occur in a vacuum, you have to be thinking about, again, the business aspect of what you're creating.
The first question I ask nowadays when I have the privilege and honor of someone asking me if I'll work on something, the first two questions is deadline and budget.
Yeah. Because
really you're lying to everyone when you say, yes, I can do that. The first bunch of times I said yes, I was like, can I? I don't know. Mm-hmm. Now, when you do something like 100 pages a book, or, you know, or now I probably have I don't even know how many pages I've clocked in my career. Nowhere near Jack Kirby. But having said that, I can guess that I can probably do a project, you know, if someone's trying to hire me, you know. Yeah. But I still feel as a freelancer, you're kind of lying, because every project you're innovating a new way to get through a project, you know, with your skill set at that time.
Yeah, but there are things that, I don't want to say tricks, but at least ways you have of estimating what the project is and what it's going to entail.
True. Right? And with that in mind, I know that I don't want to do likeness. I don't want to draw like a real life person for 200 pages, you know, and their life story anymore. Even though I did that with Ames, the way I did that with Jonathan Ames on The Alcoholic, what I figured what to do was, because it started with childhood and it cascades into adulthood, I knew that I had to draw basically the same nose. Yeah. And I knew that was how you identify the character in the comic.
That is, when I haven't interviewed him, but I met David Boswell at TCAF a bunch of years ago, the Reed Fleming World's Toughest Milkman guy. What would you change if you could do it again? Someone asks him. I'd come up with a nose that's easier to draw.
That's easier to draw.
He's got that big box nose.
Yep,
and he
the box nose.
From every angle, it is the most. If I knew I was going to draw this character for 20 years, I would have given him a better nose than that, or a different nose than I could draw.
You know what's impossible to draw? Charlie Brown.
Yeah.
Impossible. Because he figured out a head shape. Because as much as simple as it looks, to arrive at simple is so difficult. And that's why we love people like Alex Toth. Because he can simplify, you know, he knows what to take away and yet have the perfect lines there, you know. But also he knew how to do noir, and he would add all kinds of flair to his artwork. But a lot of people would look at it as like, oh, that looks too cartoony, or, you know, childish or something. I'm like, no, actually, it's really sophisticated, you know.
But as a little kid, Toth, as well as Kirby of the 70s, and I'm talking when he came back to Marvel, made no sense to me whatsoever.
Me neither.
I was Neil Adams into John Byrne, with that realist
neo-realism and like foreshortening and like look at the feathered lines and all that stuff, you know?
And Terry Austin inks and all that. And it took, you know, again, those college years where I had the Jack Kirby was actually fucking amazing.
Yes.
I didn't get this when I was young. And
you would think because like in a way Jack Kirby is YA. He's very young adult, right? but it's young adult for adults.
Yeah.
And, because I think kids were terrified by this kind of, I learned that the word grotesque actually is a certain kind of beauty, so his art is kind of grotesque, and when you come and embrace that as you get older and your tastes mature and you start to realize what these people are doing because of context. Because, there's a lot of things you get exposed to without context. So you're just knee-jerk reacting. You're just going with your gut or, what appeals. And then when you put, some historical context or something else that's added to it, that actually makes it more interesting to me, the reading experience. And I think the dirty little secret, going back to your snootiness and, indie people like Love and Rockets guys, is that a lot of these folks love the superhero stuff. Yeah. They like grindhouse movies. They like the B movie, it's that, spaghetti western, chop socky, crime noir, monster romance stuff that we secretly love. I think, Yeah. At least the people I relate to.
And I think for a lot of these guys, it comes out in their work. They just don't want to filter it through guys in tights or corporate-owned superhero comics. Right. They want to go in their own direction.
But it's funny because sometimes when you see a comic series come out that's not like the top-tier characters, they do have a little more leeway and latitude.
Yeah, well, that's Alan Moore coming into the Swamp Thing back in 1980.
Or recently, Mike Allred with Bug.
Yeah. I keep showing up in my Amazon. If you read this, you might dig that thing. Right. I'm like, Mike Allred tackling those crazy Jack Kirby concepts seems like a really good idea. I should check this out at some point, but I never have. So.
Well, and he put a lot of stuff into that. You got OMAC, you got all the great characters showing up in 6 issues or whatever it was. Yeah. So, but they do tend to allow certain latitude when it's not that the more controlled characters. And now with the cinema kind of competing. Well, the cinema won, by the way. There's no competition. Right. Do people read comic books? I don't know. I do know that a lot of comic book conventions is all about the celebrities and cosplayers. And then might be a little zoo area of the people who actually make these things. Right. Yeah. Exactly. So.
All right. Speaking of, you've got somebody from The Walking Dead appearing in your new play.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We should launch into the play as long as it's starting this week. What got you into playwriting initially? This is your second significant staged.
So this is my third one, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you had the other one you adapted, but I wasn't sure if that counts.
All right. So what happened was, why plays, right? Yeah. So my godmother, the reason why I'm on planet Earth is because of my godmother, Shelley Winters, the late Shelley Winters, who's a famous actress from back in the day. I think she's most known for The Poseidon Adventure, and I think she won 2 Oscars, but she did 100 movies, from A-type movies to schlock, because she did horror and stuff like that. Anyway, so she introduced my parents, and that meant that and the reason why my mother knew her is my mother, I think at the time in Michigan, Grosse Pointe, Michigan, did some theater stuff. And my dad knew Marilyn Monroe. And through, I guess, knowing Marilyn, he met Jane Mansfield. He would meet other people like a Shelley.
How did he know Marilyn?
How did he know Marilyn? At age 16, he went up to her and introduced himself and said, could you give me a kiss? And she did. And they were friends for the last 8 years of her life. Mm-hmm. So, and he's written a book about it, and he's written 2 other books about her, and he is the author, he's the expert on Marilyn that has been on TV shows, Larry King, that kind of stuff. And again, books and whatnot. And he gets interviewed all the time. So, and I grew up in a household with a guy who my dad who respected and admired and loved this person that died before I was born, and then met my mom, had me and my brother. And, so we grew up around a lot of theater people. Gotcha. Okay. And then there's my godmother. So I would go to plays as a kid and I loved it. I realized that as much as I've dedicated my life to comic books, I've really dedicated my life to storytelling. Mm-hmm. Okay. Cause I went to SUNY Purchase for art and then transitioned.
Yeah. It's an ambiguous term nowadays.
I know, right? Yeah. But into film. And so I've been wanting to work on movies, TV shows. I've actually been developing a TV show right now. With a co-writer and theater. And I guess the reason why I didn't really think about doing theater was because I don't know how you do it. As much as it should be easy to figure out, you know, I mean, Shackleton figured it out, right? When they were stuck on ice, didn't they do a lot of theater to, you know, to entertain each other? It's kind of a natural thing that you can do. Even on a Friday night, I feel like sometimes I'm putting on a character, you know, or when you drink a little too much whiskey or something like that. You know, we're all kind of acting sometimes in some way. And, or at least when you tell a joke, you know, it's how you convey that punchline, you know, and I feel like that's true to a lot of storytelling techniques. So, having seen theater, growing up around theater, going to SUNY Purchase and meeting other theater, you know, majors and befriending these folks. So, you know, it was always in the back of my head about doing that. So when I'd written a bunch of screenplays that were never going to go anywhere, I realized, well, I could try to do them as graphic novels because I can draw these things. I know what these look like, and it's cheaper to produce it that way. Or can I turn them into plays, which is a job because, you know, suddenly that car chase, you probably can't do that in a play, you know? In fact, that's one of the problems I had with one of my plays. I had to take a major part out because there's a car chase. Although I spoke to the director, Ian W. Hill, who directed my first play, Switch to Kill, and my recent play, Harry Carey Kane. And he's like, we can figure out a car chase. We can make that happen. I'm like, okay.
I do have the Howard story that apparently Chaykin in his early days was drawing Westerns and was shitty at drawing horses. And so largely his workaround was, oh, here he comes on his horse, and a panel, you know, off panel, the guy would come walking in from there.
That's
so
right.
He wouldn't actually have to draw the horse at any point.
That's right.
So,
yeah. Horse. I mean, the famous thing for cartoon artists in comics is you don't want to draw horses, crowd scenes, and car chases, you know, especially crowd scenes. That's the worst. I do encourage, though, learning how to draw horses. My girlfriend, Jen Ferguson, is a painter, and she loves horses, and she paints them all the time. She actually went to Ireland last year. I think they're called Connemara because they have these Connemara horses. She went there to ride these horses and draw them, which I thought was like amazing. That's how much she loves them. Anyway, so theater. So yeah, I realized, well, you know, I love seeing theater. You can never record theater properly because you have to be there. Yeah. You know, and every time they do that play over and over again, it's a little bit different. So the experience you have is only what you hold on to, you know, when you have that experience. When you watch a movie, we could interpret it differently, but we're seeing what they, the final version of it, right? I know when you read a prose novel or book, you know, like you become the co-author because of how you might see the room or the situation. Again, there's a lot of interpreting, but you become more of a co-author with prose.
Those are also forms, much like comics, where it's linear, but you can still go back. Yeah. Right. Theater, you can't sit there in a live theater and have them rewind 2 minutes and re-listen to what they said.
Which is why it's really hard to do exposition in theater without it making it look like exposition. I mean, it's true in across all forms, but specifically in theater and then you realize, how do I repeat some of the things that needs to be sink into the audience? While being tricky about it, you know, unless you're being overt or whatever. So anyway, I was hanging out with, there was a situation happened. I was hanging out with Fred Van Lente and Crystal Skillman, his wife, and Fred writes a lot of comic books and Crystal is a playwright. And we were at Riley Brown's wedding. He's a cartoonist. He's drawn Deadpool and stuff like that. I don't know, was it 2014, 2015 or whatever? And I was asking Crystal what she's doing, and she was telling me about this play she'd been writing. And she's like, you know, the Brick Theater in Williamsburg is doing another comic book festival, meaning that they adapt plays from comics or they work with people who work in comics to make plays. And I was like, oh snap, I've written some stuff. I could probably like try to submit something. She's like, please do. So she encouraged me. I submitted to the Brick. They picked it among other stuff. And they did 4 performances of my first play, Switch to Kill, produced and directed by Ian W. Hill. And I was bitten by the bug. Yeah. So
what appealed to you? What got you?
It's that live reaction. You know how like I think one of the things that appeals to people about the internet, which is also like the downfall, the drug, is the immediate. You can have an immediate. That was part of me when in 2006 I co-founded and created Activate, this webcomics platform on LiveJournal, one of the things I really liked about it was you can get immediate reactions.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting, and I read this somewhere recently, is that, and they've proven this, that an audience's heartbeat syncs together at some point during a play if it's well done. Mm-hmm. And it's like one rhythm of this community of voyeurs into this story, and it becomes this thing that's happened, this synergy, between what's happening on stage and what's happening in the audience, and it's this beautiful, like, you can't get that anywhere else. You can maybe get that in a movie theater if you're not on your phone or you're not shoving popcorn in your mouth,
Which I'll tell you, that was the Jonathan Ames screening that I went to
mm-hmm.
last week. I was like, wow, I'm in a room full of people who are not looking at their phone. I don't go to the movies for that reason.
Right.
And I was sitting there like, wow, I'm sitting next to A.O. Scott and all these other people.
Really?
I'm like, and none of them have a light going. They're not checking. They're
I get
watching
so
TV
distracted.
while they're,
I get so distracted by that. I just want to punch people.
Right.
I'm like, why are you here? Can you not for 2 hours?
Yeah, the world is not your living room.
Yes.
That's how I always feel. So anyway,
that's how I feel. In fact, that's why I watch a lot of movies in my living room, so that I don't deal with that distraction with my Bose speakers. I think Bitten by the Bug was just like to see that kind of reaction. And again, it doesn't mean that I was winning any prizes or nothing like that, but you were sitting in a room together with people making something out of almost nothing, especially like at the Brick, it's just like a small stage, a black box theater, mm-hmm. with minimal props and sets, and costume design and then behavior. People behaving in front of each other. I love that. Yeah. So, I realized, well, I have some other stories, and I had this other thing I've been trying to write as a screenplay / graphic novel called Harry Carey Kane. And I was hanging out with my buddy Phil Cruz, who's an actor, but he was also telling me, I also direct and I produce stuff. I was like, really? And I saw a show that he produced, and I thought it was really good. And he liked my writing, and that was in 2016, I think. And he encouraged me to write a one act. I was like, well, what's a one act? Like, how many pages is that? He said, well, it could be 10 pages to 20 pages, maybe, or something like that. So I was like, all right. And
then what's the deadline?
Yeah, what's the deadline? Right. No, I'm really good at that. Like once I'm in, I don't do anything else, like I realize that, like, even though I occasionally will drink whiskey at Sonny's bar, I get high off of creation. Like once that's another kind of being bitten by the bug. Like, I love that. There's something about it. Now, is that narcissistic? I don't know. It could be, but what the hell? I'll own that. So I wrote this scene, and then maybe it was like 2 scenes or something like that. And he really liked it. I was like, I want to add a little more. And it just kept adding till finally it was a play. It was actually a play. And, we took that to Ian W. Hill, the guy who directed my first one. And that came out in 2017. And I had befriended, Stoya, the adult adult film star. Is that how
I think adult film actress.
Adult film actress.
We now go with. Yeah.
And I had met her through the heavy metal. I think the CEO of heavy metal, Jeff Krelitz, and he wanted to put us together to do a story for heavy metal for the sex issue. And he said, well, why don't you meet up with Stoya and go through some of her essays and maybe take an essay and adapt that or make a comic out of that. So I met up with Stoya, who lives in, has a space in Brooklyn. She's a sweetheart, and she does so many different things.
Yeah, we've got some mutual friends.
She's great.
Yeah, who
very
also wanted to connect. I know you've spoken about whether I could.
Oh, I'd love for you to talk to her.
I mentioned it to a couple of our mutual pals. Like, oh my God, she'd be perfect.
She'd be great.
Show. So
she'd be great.
Yeah.
So anyway, then we did like a 4-page comic for heavy metal, and from there, I thought, well, you know what? Like, she'd be really good as the lead in Harry Carey Kane, the female lead in Harry Carey Kane. And I talked to her about it, and she hadn't done any theater yet. And I said, well, I don't know how to teach acting, that kind of acting or directing, but we're surrounded by great people. And she just dove right in and just, owned it, and, we did 10 sold out performances, last fall, of 2017. And already, like, as that show was ending, I was doing the finishing touches on my new play.
Cool.
Because you got to keep the momentum, as far as I'm concerned. And it kind of turned out to be kind of a trilogy of stories, even though they're very different stories from each other, from Switch to Kill, Harry Carey Kane, The Last Bar in the World. They're tethered by, of all things, existential hitmen, and I don't know why and how that happened.
Post Tarantino world, man.
It's Tarantino. What a Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction.
Oh, the story I everybody has their weird Tarantino thing. I saw Reservoir Dogs when I was in college, and when I was in grad school, Pulp Fiction was coming out, and I had this coterie of pals. There's three of us who were the big Tarantino freaks,
right?
And this one pal of ours worked in the movie theater in town and said, "We got Pulp Fiction in. It's debuting tomorrow night, but come at midnight and we'll just screen it for us."
Right.
And so, knowing absolutely nothing, pre-internet world, knowing nothing about what Pulp Fiction was about, the structure, the whole shebang, any of it, all we had was Reservoir Dogs. We sat down at midnight, and Terry started the film, and 2 hours and 40 minutes later, four guys' jaws just dropped.
Yep.
Like, holy shit, we just saw the future. We were just in awe and drove home just dazed 3 o'clock in the morning from that thing. But yeah, everybody's got their experiences with it. I'm like, we got to see it before anybody else in this little area of Annapolis, Maryland. But yeah,
that was a game changer.
It was amazing. So
I forget how, but I got to read the script before I saw the movie.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I directed the whole thing in my head. It was like insane, And I remember actually being a little disappointed in parts of the movie because of how I directed it. I can't tell you what that is now, but of course it's an amazing movie. I also got to read some other scripts of his at the time. I was just like trying to get whatever he had written, because I was like, who is this guy?
And there was that stretch, where it was the Oliver Stone flick where they bought his
Natural Born Killers. Yeah. I read the original script to that.
And the Tony Scott one.
Right.
True Romance.
True Romance. Amazing, right? And actually, Tony Scott rocked it. Anyway, anyway,
Existential Hitman, we were on.
Existential Hitman because of Tarantino. But also, if you think about Reservoir Dogs, that's a play.
Most of Tarantino's work is about acting.
Well, the most recent one,
Hateful
Eight is a play.
Yeah.
So
watching Inglourious Bastards is about acting.
Yes,
as is Reservoir Dogs. It's all about staying in character, as is Jules and Vince.
That's right.
And their scene, let's get into character.
That's right.
Everything is about how you act.
That's right.
As a performer.
And I've always said that about Tarantino's work. He's like the greatest DJ of movies. Like he picks the best parts of the genres you love and mixes them up really nice, But I actually went to the New York Film Festival premiere of Pulp Fiction, and I remember. After the movie, we went to Tavern on the Green, I think, is where they would have the parties. Because my mom was deputy director at the New York State Council of the Arts, so I would get tickets. Yeah. And there's an angel floating toward me. I actually looked down the ground, and her feet were not touching the ground. It was Uma Thurman. Yeah. Oh, my God.
You got to read Richard E. Grant's film diaries with nails, because he was in Henry and June.
Oh, okay.
When Uma was 17 or 18, and she sets foot out of the trailer, and it's that same thing. And this is just for blocking. She's not in makeup,
right?
And everyone, oh my God, like a room full of old men who've been in acting for years. Just she just has overpowering with her beauty.
And that's what I experienced, and not even having known what you just said. But I do remember one time, there's SPX, Small Press Expo. In Bethesda, Maryland. It was one of my first favorite Comic Cons to ever go to. It wasn't even a Comic Con. It's a
festival. Yeah.
It's a festival. Yeah. And it was like the third year, I think. It might have been 95 that I first went to one. And then I had been going for at least a good decade after that. But in the early years of that, I remember, so Bethesda, Maryland is right next to DC and Virginia, right? So one of the organizers would host like a party or a barbecue in his Virginia home. And I remember it was like 10 of us, like me, Evan Dorkin, Greg Bennett was the guy who organized this. And I remember like looking out in the backyard, and there's this woman. And I said to my friend, I was like, yo, she looks like she could be Tarantino's mom. And the guy said, that's Tarantino's mom.
Yeah.
I was like, what are you talking about? And
comics nerds.
She's a comics fan, and she had been living around that time, and she was awesome, and she was brassy, and her name's Connie, and we were like getting drunk, eating, and I remember like around midnight or something, she had been talking about my comics, and she's like, I want to get you guys some tacos and go get Dean's Comics. So like we go to some late night place. She buys us tacos. Greg opens up Big Planet Comics to grab her some of my Billy Dogma comics at the time. And it was just such a beautiful moment. And I could see like, wow, this is the person that made Tarantino. Like this is, he comes from this person who like, and the stuff that he loves definitely comes from his mom, and we're still friends on Facebook to this day, me and Connie. I've never met her son, but, and I love her son's work, but she's a spitfire, what a great character.
So Existential Hitmen.
Yes.
It forms a trilogy for your work. Expand on, particularly what The Last Bar at the End of the World is.
Well, The Last Bar at the End of the World, and I sometimes I like to hide things because you got to go see the damn thing to find out what it's about.
Don't spoil anything.
So I'm not spoiling anything, but one thing I had to say that was encouraged to me to say, two things happened when I wrote that play. I thought it was about two people, and everyone who read the play, especially the people who are acting in it and directing it, said, no, it's actually about one person. And I was like, what are you talking about? And it was like, it's about the dying cartoonist. I was like, don't say that. What are you talking about? Like, why would you say the dying cartoonist? Because I didn't want to confirm that. Yeah. And they were like, no, he's dying. And I was like, I know that, but I don't want to say that. And maybe because I didn't want to admit it to myself or something. I don't know. But they were like, no. And in fact, you have to say that in the press release. They felt that was part of like the promo draw. And the draw is a dying cartoonist, right? And I'm like, okay, fine. But then it confirms something in the play that I wanted to keep open. Okay. And you'd have to see it to see what I'm talking about. And so I was like, all right. And then the other thing was like, and he's the protagonist. And so my original version of this play didn't have an opening scene that I now open with that confirms him as the protagonist. So I thought, oh, that's interesting, because I thought it was about two characters who are best friends. They come to a fork in the road, and then we follow one of the friends, and they come to resolve something kind of sort of emotionally. And then the other one goes and resolves their demons or whatever, right? Kind of thing. But no, I added a lot more to it because they were right. Like, all right, the story really is about this one guy, even though I give them both a lot. I originally gave them equal amount of play. Yeah. I now give more play to one character. And also I don't follow structure always correctly. Like you were talking about Pulp Fiction, which plays with time and structure. So I tend to, ruffle the feathers, as it were, with structure as well, because as much as I studied film and studied comic books and storytelling and everything else, I definitely like to throw curveballs, because I think that's what life is a bunch of curveballs, so you can have your inciting incident and your denouement and the crisis and all this stuff. I want to be the guy that writes the scene where you introduce a gun and it doesn't go off, that kind of stuff, right? So this story, talks about a lot of different things. And sometimes when you are the writer of something, you don't want to just qualify it into a paragraph. And that's the hardest thing for me to do with anything I work on that's large. Like, even The Red Hook, or when I worked on The Fox, or any of my plays. It's like, so tell me in a paragraph.
The elevator pitch.
Yeah. And I can't stand it because it doesn't do service to what else I put in there, because one thing I do in my storytelling is everything matters. Maybe I learned that from Mamet a little bit, David Mamet, who wrote a book that I've been giving to people forever, to the point where I think now a lot of other cartoonists give it to everyone else, and it's on syllabus, is David Mamet's On Directing Film. Have you heard of this? Yeah. It's like 100 pages. And I think what it is I haven't read it in a while, but it was like a class he gave, right? And he really boils down narrative structure. And one of the things he said that made a lot of sense to me, at least in terms of entertainment, was, because this isn't real life, was if you're building a structure for a house, and that's your story, and you can pull a nail out, and the nail represents a scene or a dialogue or a character or something, and it's still standing, you got to get rid of the nail. You got to get rid of the scene, the person, whatever, right? And then that term, killing your darlings, because you can love those things, but you take them out because they're not necessary.
That's been my toughest thing going back to writing now. Is the superfluous elements. I look back at old things and realize, all these things can go.
They can go, but my recent, challenge is to try to keep them in. Yeah. Keep them inside, because there's a reason that they're there. If they're that fun, how can you still make them be necessary and fun?
Yeah.
You know?
Generally, I save a text file with all of those pulls, and I could figure at some point this might go back in, or I'll figure out a place to put this. Otherwise, another piece. But,
so the recent play I wrote was, so the first two I wrote were basically like, polished versions of older material, right? The newest one is a Frankenstein of the best parts of a screenplay I wrote like 15 years ago. Coupled with 3 essays I wrote at Yaddo, the Artist Writers Retreat in Saratoga Springs, and New York, and a lot of new material where I was reacting not only to current events, let's say, and certain things are bugging me, like this post-truth era we live in right now, but and comics and my love for comics and stuff like that. And Jack Kirby is I pay a lot of homage to Jack Kirby in it. But yeah, I wanted to do a mashup, and then also because now that I've experienced recent theater again, being a part of it, I had a better sense of how to write it. So I was actually writing brand new scenes, thinking about Seth Gilliam and Stoya and what they would be like on a subway scene. Like what would happen between those two, in character. Thinking about certain actors and writing scenes, knowing who they are now. Kind of like when a writer knows who the artist is, they're going to collaborate with an artist in a comic, and they know what they can do. Yeah. So at least you have that in your pocket, and then maybe you try to push each other, and grow each other. That's kind of what I was doing with my writing on this new play. Was like try not only to push myself with what I know now, but also with the people I'm working with.
Yeah, how much of that was informed by your experience as an artist, working in collaboration with so many different writers over the years?
Yeah. And it's funny because I'm trying to be more a writer than an artist.
And that's what I wondered also. Are you working more as a writer in the comic space?
I think I am. Well, first of all,
I mean, you've also done your solo stuff. But,
to my dying day, though, I would say this, like, drawing comics is writing because image is text in comics. So I finally arrived at that. I'm like, wait a second, I have been writing. Because I was so nervous about the idea of writing. I'm going to suck. I was like, wait a second, I've kind of been writing.
Yeah.
Because of comics. Anyway, so with that in mind, and then it's, of course, it's like adding dialogue and verbiage and words and committing to things, and and I'm a little corny because of the stuff I like. I like corny stuff too, like I said, like grindhouse movies and verbose dialogue and all that kind. I mean,
and the Jack Kirby bombast.
Stan Lee, Tarantino does it. Okay. I have a couple of monologues in some of my plays. They're 2 pages long, and I know the actors rolling their eyes, and I'm like, don't worry about it. You can figure this out, let's, and then they go off and they make it work. They're magicians, these people. But I'm sorry, I lost the focus on
the working as an artist for other writers and how that informs what you do as a writer working for the stage.
True. That's an interesting question because
I hated it when writers would tell me to do X, and then you realize you're doing the same thing to some of your actors.
So what you don't want to do is this, although I've been told, yeah, it's okay if you tell them you're going to do it this way. If someone's not getting something, you don't want to act it for them because they have to arrive at it themselves. It's like telling an artist what to do. Mm-hmm. It's like, I don't want to be the technician to your ideas.
Right.
Okay. What if you hired me or you cast me or whatever, and you know what I can do, why don't we talk about that a little bit and then get around that if we need to push that or something. So there's an art form to that, and luckily, because I'm not a director, I don't have to do a lot of that. Sometimes I'll be asked, what do you think? And then I have an opinion. I mean, maybe what I'm doing is the same hesitation I had about writing. I have a hesitation on directing, and yet I want to direct. I know I do. Yeah. Can I do it? I don't know, but I need to find out, So in collaboration, I prefer, if I'm drawing your story, let me tackle this. Let me figure this out. Now, if something is egregiously wrong, let's talk about it, and that's happened, but meanwhile, you got to let me do my thing, that's what we're doing together. So I'm letting them do their thing because this is, I think I mentioned to you before about adaptation. I don't know if it was in this interview or not, but I love adaptation because that's what it is. It's adapting something. So this is a version of, and they can, look, how many times do they adapt Shakespeare's plays? Some are good, some are bad, whatever, but they're going to do that for thousands of years, apparently, because this guy, has the best plays, right? So, So like with that in mind, sure, maybe you only get one chance. Like I could see like an indie novel being adapted into an indie movie and it tanks and didn't do really well, and you thought, oh, that was my one shot, But like that's okay because you still have the source material, okay, and you can disregard. Or like Fight Club. I read Fight Club. I like the movie better.
Yeah, by far.
So, but it doesn't.
I consider it the greatest job of adaptation that's been done because as a novel, it doesn't work that well.
Right.
As a movie, 2/3 of it really
it's
work.
really good.
Yeah.
Or look at American Spider the movie. Now it's nothing like the comic, and yet it's exactly like the comic. It's insane, like so. I don't know. I think like what was it? Hitchcock or somebody said that 90% of great directing is great casting. So if you can go with that, and again, unless something's egregious, or guess what, you arrive at something together that you both. What I love about collaboration is when I've done something I never would have done, and hopefully the collaborator feels the same way. That we've arrived at something that could only have happened because of us. And that's when I look at my favorite Jack Kirby work is Fantastic Four with Stan Lee. As much as I love Jack Kirby and his like, unexpurgated Kirby, right?
Yeah.
Like OMAC is fucking amazing,
That said, the run of Fantastic Four from about 40 to 60 is the greatest comics of all time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I hands down, I just look from month to month. They're like, oh, let's create the Black Panther,
Yep.
and then we'll create the Silver Surfer
Yep.
and the Inhumans and Galactus, and just throw them off one month after month. Yeah.
The way they handled the Frightful Four, I think, during that, it's unbelievable. That artwork, the storytelling, it's just it was. I don't know, what you call it, like a zenith moment or something. I don't know. It was incredible.
Favorite Kirby inker?
Well, what popped in my head is Joe Sinnott.
Yeah.
Okay, because again,
That's
those
so
issues,
definitive.
those FF issues, it's got to be Joe Sinnott. And then I kind of like a little bit what Chick Stone did.
Yeah.
Of a kind of clunky, thick, blotchy inking that he did. And I've come to really like Mike Royer on the later stuff.
Yeah.
Also because he lettered them, like it was like, they worked really well together. And I'm trying to think of anybody else that was like associated. I mean, we're not going to go to Vince Coletta because everyone knows, but I also don't want to bash the guy. I mean, some of the Thors were okay.
For the favorites, not the ones that you detested. But so speaking of dying cartoonists, you turned 50 last year.
Yeah. Speaking of dying, you turned 50.
As milestones go, what did that lead to in terms of, reflection on your career, on life? What was that a significant?
So weirdly enough, I've been saying for about a decade, since I was 40, that I won't have anything interesting to say till I'm 50 years old. I don't know why I jokingly said that a lot.
Yeah.
And then I turned 50. And then Harry Carey Kane came out, which I tried to pitch as a graphic novel for years, that idea. Yeah. And I did change it and alter it and update it for the play. And I felt like, I finally had something to say a little bit, like, wait a second, there is something meaningful here. Not that I didn't do anything meaningful before, but now, like, I have a few works that I could probably list on my one hand that would be on my gravestone. And I've done a ton of stuff, but I don't have my Dark Knight Returns. I don't have my Sin City. I feel like, Billy Dogma, which is something I haven't done in a while, but I've written a bunch of stories that I'd like to draw, could be my Sin City, my indie comic, But now I'm looking at the Red Hook that way, because the Red Hook was kind of like a lark, and the Red Hook is, and so I have a couple of comic book characters I've created that might be like my Sin City, and I have some ideas for the franchises to get my Dark Knight, maybe. But again, who am I to say something like that? Like, not most people don't have their Dark Knights and Sin Cities, Right. But I also think it's about what you strive for, Eventually, I think, and again, it's not necessarily ego, but I would like to have my name above the character, like Dean Haspiel's iteration of whatever it is, right? And so, because I did like that about Frank Miller, Paul Pope, certain artists that we admire and that actually, brought their A game and changed the way comics work, and so I think that 50 more, if anything, didn't make me feel old, although I feel a little old. It confirmed what I've been wanting to do even more so. if that makes sense, you know? And yeah, it's a milestone year, but I'm doing some cool stuff. Like, I can't complain. You know, I work all the time, but I can't complain.
Yeah, that's what I wonder if you look back at it and say, you know, I'm working. I'm doing the stuff that I
don't make a dime off my plays.
Yeah,
but these people are basically doing it for free as well, you know, because plays are a bitch. They're really hard to produce, and they aren't recorded and what do you call it, distributed. You know, you have to go see a play or it's gone, you know? And I can't believe that these people do these things unless you have a nice long run of it or something. Or what was that, the one that the musical everyone
loved? The
Fantastics. Or Hamilton. Well, Fantastics.
Oh, okay, yeah. I thought you were going way back.
Way back is Fantastics. I remember going into the Fantastics theater because my good buddy Chris Orbach's father was Jerry Orbach. And he was that, you know, alumni of the Fantastics. Yeah. And I think he actually was ran the theater or did the door or something like that. So he had the keys.
Oh yeah, no, I think he was totally every physical aspect of putting that play on.
Yeah. So anyway.
But Hamilton, like you were saying, when you have a giant, you know, mega hit of.
But of course, you're gonna go have CD, you know, albums and recordings and stuff. Yeah. So I get it. But that, you know, that probably will never happen to any work I do. But I can't, you know, I have to just be happy with the. I think I have a little bit of an audience. I hope, you know. I know that's what publishers have to do, is to figure out what you can sell based on what you have sold. And I don't think I've ever hit the mark that well, you know. But I do put my best foot forward, and I do put stuff out there that I think is meaningful and hopefully entertaining. And that's all I can do, you know.
You talk about the Red Hook. It's part of your New Brooklyn comics. Can you talk first about the web comics versus print, and what it was like working in that form? Because it's a very different set of parameters.
All right. So in 2006, in 2005, I actually created Activate, and then we didn't launch it until I think February 1st or something of 2006. And I noticed on LiveJournal that there were a lot of other cartoonists, and everyone would be talking to each other, and then we figured out how to put up images on LiveJournal, and you'd be showing sneak peeks of what you're working on. And after a while, I was like, damn, you know, we have enough cartoonists here that if you create your own comics and once a week post a new, you know, edition, you know, whether it's 4 panels or a page or whatever it is, 6 panels, and you show up. I knew one thing was really key to the success of Activate was if you showed up every week, meaning you, the artist, putting your stuff out there. And one of the reasons why I created Activate was because I'd already worked on The Quitter, Harvey P. Cart's The Quitter, and it was great to have a job for a year, but I disappeared. I was gone. Right. And then what you realize is the book comes out, and unless it's Watchmen or Dark Knight, it gets 2 or 3 weeks of play, maybe some nice reviews, and then bye-bye, we're on to the next, right? And of course, you're competing with tons of other things coming out that week. So it's like, what are the chances of it blowing up so much so that you can chill out a little bit? You know, maybe. Although as an artist, I never chill out. Anyway, so I was like, all right. And I had gotten, I don't remember if we had already sold The Alcoholic with Jonathan Ames, but I might have been working on other little projects at the time. And I realized I don't want to disappear like that again. So I can use the internet, show up every week, not only and also because Harvey P. Cart, it was Harvey P. Cart's The Quitter. Right. I just drew it. Yeah. I didn't do anything else, by the way. But what he did do is hand in 62 pages of just stick figures talking, and I had to make a fucking comic book out of that. Yeah. Okay,
but you're just the artist.
I'm just the art. I just illustrated it. That's it, right? Yeah. So, and that kind of pissed me off, and that's not because of Harvey. That's because of how things work.
Yeah, it's a system.
You know.
Yeah.
And also, like, you know, you're not going to go online or in the articles and teach people that, oh, you know what actually happens is this. You know, they just want to read the damn thing and go on to the next thing. You know, I get it. I'm the same way. But what I did want is to kind of start to manifest my own voice a little bit more so and commit to it. So I did this Billy Dogma comic at Activate, and then I did another one, and it did really well to the point where then I put that into print, those 2 stories. So I've been dabbling a lot with web comics, digital comics, the whole platform, the fact that everyone was slowly but surely glomming onto this platform of being online all the time, you know? And, you know, as our bookstores diminish, our comic shops go away, you know? Yeah. Amazon's taking over, everything else. I was like, well, you can't beat them, join them type thing. So, but also you're trying to figure out, are you just making print comics online?
Yeah. That's
or are you doing digital like making it
exploiting the
exploiting the virtues of online. And I've done that a little bit, but not so much so like other people have. Like Scott McCloud talks about it. My former studio mate Riley Brown does really good stuff with that online. But I wasn't as interested in that, even though I've had to do that. I remember when I've done a bunch of comics for DC Comics, like Batman 66, they made me do extra panels so they can make it almost like poor man's animation.
Yeah.
So if you're clicking through it on Comixology, it's showing more than the print version, kind of thing. So I was like, okay, whatever, I can do that as long as you're paying me. And then also I did a comic called Street Code for Zuda, which was DC Comics' webcomics initiative. But really it was just basically half a page of a comic, so you get a little more landscape out of it, and you click to the next one, and it's the bottom half of the comic book page you just drew.
So
kind
essentially,
of thing.
just working in the forms of print.
Yeah. So I mean, I've done different things, and now with the Red Hook at Line Webtoon, I have to create a vertical scroll, like akin to toilet paper.
Yeah, and that's what I'm wondering. When it's something like that compared to something like print.
Now, when you're a master cartoonist like I am,
of course, yeah.
What you do, even though they strongly advise against it, is I draw it in print first, then cut it up for digital vertical scroll, knowing that I'm actually just preparing for the eventual print version.
Gotcha.
But with that in mind, I've had to lose my famous Howard Chaykin insets. I've had to go more portrait than landscape, and allow more taller panels because of how the thumb scrolls through the vertical scroll, and the reveals are happening at the bottom of panels and stuff like that. So my actual layouts in the Red Hook, which you'll see in the print version, is a little more base. A little more normalized than what I was doing, like, let's say, in The Fox or in any other comic book I've ever drawn, to be honest, like even The Alcoholic. Because what I like to do is I like to have figures jumping over panels or invading, space, or, using the virtues of what an inset does well, whether it's a close-up or hiding a piece of information from another character or whatever it is, sound effects. But I can't really do that because it would just add a lot of hassle to the editing part of turning those pages into vertical scroll. Right. So I have to be okay with that. And maybe what it's done is made it a little more user-friendly to look at, as a print comic, eventually, which will be coming out. The Red Hook will be coming out in June from Image. Cool. So I'm really excited. So what's really been great about Line Webtoon is that they're basically, they have exclusivity online for a few years where they pay me to write and draw something I own, that I can then merchandise on my own or put into print on my own, because they don't care about print, because print is dead, man. Yeah.
Building that infrastructure for them would be silly. They want to sell their ads against online. Yeah.
So I'm basically being funded or underwritten by Line Webtoon to have a secondary source of income. And I would even hazard to say, as much as I might be getting new fans online from, Indonesia and South Korea and whoever reads the app or whatever, and the Americans that they're trying to woo to the American version of their app, I still feel that the majority of my quote readers, which might be a handful, probably haven't read the Red Hook or any of those comics yet, because they do prefer to read it in print. They are waiting for the book. So I'm excited to kind of have a new fan base or recharge my old fan base with this material coming out later, So that's kind of the current plan right now, is to be working on a few of these, a trilogy, have them come out in print, stagger those out. But then if there's weight in this new Brooklyn universe with the Red Hook and some of the other characters I've created, plus co-created with other creative teams, like the Purple Heart with Vito De Sante, the writer, and Ricardo Venancio, the artist, and have that come out as a book, as part of this kind of new wave of superheroes during a time when really you're going to really compete with Marvel and DC, Dean. Yeah. I'm not competing. I'm not. I'm just, you can just jump on the ground floor with these characters. That's all.
The Haspiel verse.
That's all.
That's it.
But yeah, I would love to.
I think Dino verse is probably better.
Dino verse, or we could call it something and say ages Dean and up, which is somebody just suggested once. But yeah, I would like to do a lot more Red Hook stories. I have them. I'd also like to revisit Billy Dogma. I'd like to do more plays. I'd like to do this TV show or a couple TV shows. I'd like to make a movie. I do want to enter the other storytelling realms, because honestly, I am turning 50 is reminding me that sitting at the art table every day, I'm just getting fat and tired.
No, you look great. I'm just kidding.
No,
you look terrible.
You look terrible. That's right. Thank you. But having said that, like I need to get back up and out there. I'm a social person. Sitting at the art table betrays my personality. Like I don't. It doesn't serve my personality. It doesn't allow me to go out like where I feel more comfortable is around people. And even though I have a shared studio in Gowanus, I get there around 1:00. Most of them have normal lives, my studio mates, and they split by 7:00 the latest because they're having dinner with their significant others, or they've made plans, or they're going to the movies. And I'm sitting there by myself till 12:00. I might as well stay at home, or maybe turn it around and try and get done by 7:00 at home so I can go out. Because once I settle in at the studio, I'm there. I'm done. And also I need to produce a page. These deadlines. I'm one of the few studio mates who actually still gets work. Like on a regular basis. So I understand that's my burden, but I'm also privileged and lucky to have that burden.
Yeah, did that freak you out when you first realized, like the studio you came up in, that you had your own studio?
You're talking about like Upstart to.
Yeah.
So that was such a great experience, Upstart. But I've also had my own posse. I've had my best friends, right? We always called each other like this posse or that posse. And I wanted to recreate that in my studio, and get that sensibility. And we did manage to get that when I had Deep Six studio, which I think was in 2007 or 2008. I can't remember. Over here in Gowanus. And we had a good 3-year run, maybe 4. I can't remember, with some of the best up and coming current cartoonists. And we did Activate together, and we published an Activate primer through IDW, and we did events together and all this stuff. And it was really, it kind of is exactly what I wanted that feeling to have. And then we kind of broke up, and I went and started Hang Die. And Hang Die was another studio space that was above Book Court here, which was one of the last bookstores we had, and now that's gone. We had a good year there, and I was doing that with another group of writers and artists like Chris Miskevich and the late Seth Kushner, who was a great friend of mine, a photographer who I miss deeply. And then we kind of transitioned. Hang Die over back to the old studio space because we lost that space, and so we found another space back at the old digs. And then and I met Krista Casano and a bunch of other cartoonists, and we again kind of jump started this sense of posse again. But it's an ebb and flow. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And then when we lost that space, the current space I'm in now is basically the refugees of 4 different comic studios, because some people had to leave, some people moved to Philadelphia, some people went back home. So our sensibility doesn't necessarily jive. I mean, we're all there to do our work, but it's just not, a different. It's not that posse like the Rat Pack or whatever I'm kind of going for. And I don't mean John Hughes Rat Pack. I'm thinking
we're going the old school.
The old school,
the Dino, the other Dino.
The other Dino. That's right.
Last 2 questions. Still want to draw the Fantastic Four?
So I have drawn Canon Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
I think there was a 3-issue run where they needed to, a little flashback or something happened. I forget what it was right now. In actual FF a few years ago. And I drew a few pages per issue. So I have done Canon FF, but I actually want to write and draw the FF. Yes. I have story ideas. I have a great idea that I thought would be the best way to bring them back, but now they're being brought back. They just announced that Dan Slott and Sarah Pichelli are bringing back the FF. But if I didn't do FF, then I'd want to do Marvel 2-in-1. But they now have Marvel 2-in-1 with Chip Zdarsky, and it's great. It's a different kind of Marvel 2-in-1. It's the Human Torch and the Thing versus the one I grew up with, where it was the Thing and a guest star.
A guest each time. Yeah.
And I did do a Thing miniseries with Evan Dorkin, and I'm pretty proud of the work, but I just don't feel I've ever been ready for prime time. Mm-hmm. So I need to get rid of that idea. I need to kill it, and just say, this is how I write and draw it, and this is how it would be. Because you kind of have to project how things might look, and then you try to access that, And I need to kind of give up that idea, because I just do things the way I do things. Now that I'm old enough, and, you start to lean on your shortcuts and how you do things, you kind of have to be okay with that, as much as you want to challenge yourself and grow. And that's another thing. You grow up in public when you're doing comics.
Sure.
I have people come up to me with old comics. I'm so embarrassed to sign.
My early episodes, I cringe over something. Wow, I should have said X, Y, and Z, and I was terrible back then.
But you do it in public, and no one's telling you you're doing it wrong unless you're doing it really wrong. Yeah. They're just enjoying the thing as it comes out.
Yeah.
You know, and then when you look back, you go, wow, I have changed, haven't I? Something happened there. But yeah, I would love to do FF.
Okay, last question. And I'm not going to ask the Howard Chaykin other question because it's too embarrassing.
Okay.
I will ask you off mic.
Okay.
It's not the Kirby question, or it's actually asking a question of Kirby's great quote. Will comics break your heart?
They have.
Yeah.
I think, will comics break your heart? Of course they can break your heart. Will they break every heart? I like to look at it two different ways. One is, will they hurt you and make you feel bad and like wonder? I have had recent nightmares where I woke up and I go, wait, I dedicated my life to comics? What is wrong with me? What happened? Which is probably why I'm writing plays and trying to do other things as well, you know? But then will they break your heart because it's a beautiful thing, you know, like a bittersweet breaking your heart, like a relationship, like a romance. Mm-hmm. And if it's that version, well, then read comics, you know, get your heart broken. You know, it's like if you found out, like, you know, in my case, I would be dating a girl and she's going to break my heart. Would you not have done it? I still would have done it to experience the love, you know, to get my heart broken. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, get your heart broken by comics.
That's a good career.
Yeah.
Dean Haspiel, thanks so much for coming on the Virtual Memories Show.
Thank you so much.
After we wrapped up, I brought up an anecdote that Howard Chaykin had mentioned with Dino, and we decided to keep this little bonus segment in too. Enjoy. Chaykin's other line was, tell Dino how delighted I was to be in my studio to hear all about how he lost his virginity the night before, and that remains one of the greatest comics events in my life. So I decided I wasn't going to ask you that on mic. So we can, you know.
Howard actually performed his version of that at a panel I did with him at a Wizard World in front of everybody, to the point where I was like, you're insane. First of all, you know, he likes to sing.
Oh, yeah.
Did he sing on yours?
Yeah,
that's right.
He told me he's coming out in April to the city, and he's
going to a bunch of musicals.
Yeah, he loves the musicals, loves singing, and, you know, embarrassses his family with this.
Yep,
but, you know.
Yep. It's insane.
Howard's got
and by the way, that was my favorite Chaykin interviews, the one you did with him.
Thank you.
It was unbelievable.
That was a lot of fun. It was a week before the Divided States of Hysteria craziness came out, so we had none of that context. And it was just, and we talked for another hour and a half before and after too.
Yeah. He's a talker.
Yeah. And it was funny to me that there are only two people I feel like I made friends with last year through the show, John Cuneo and Howard. Right. And I zapped both of them at the end of the year just with a, you know, thanks for staying in touch, et cetera. It's really nice because you're people who I actually glom on with. But there's also a degree of like, I'm trading Facebook messages with Howard Chaykin about the Glamorous Ladies of Wrestling show on Netflix. I'm like, I don't think 15-year-old Gil would have been able to process any aspect of this. I'm like, no, I was busy, you know, enjoying American Flag.
And that's happened to me, like, as I've gotten older, and I go to conventions or I do projects, and suddenly you're hanging out with your heroes. Yeah. And then that's all good.
I sometimes ask that sort of question, like, are there people you melt down around in your field? Are there people you've met who you just, holy shit, you know, you...
No, I mean, all the time. I feel like it's just... Once I realized growing up that I would, like, Robert De Niro babysat me.
Yeah.
I was fighting over the remote control with Al Pacino, but I didn't know it because I'm a kid and I had no context.
Yeah.
And, like, you know, Farley Granger was Shelley's upstairs neighbor, and he was a famous Hitchcock actor and a sweetheart. And you go, what? Like, if I could go back then now, the questions I'd ask and, like, all this stuff, right? But I've always appreciated the fact that I had access to that. So when I'm around people who or come upon people who I admire, my instinct is to go up to them, put out my and say thank you.
Yeah.
And that's it.
I've enjoyed your work for a long time.
Thank you. And if I can throw out something, I remember one day going to meet a friend near Times Square, and I'm walking down the street, and walking up toward me is Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? And he's wearing this like light blue kind of like thing that he would change out of in the show. And I walked up and I said, Mr. Rogers? And he goes, hi, neighbor. I was like, you gotta be kidding me.
That's great.
He called me neighbor. And then I put out my hand, I shook his hand, I said, thank you for my child. You know, you were my childhood kind of thing. And he said, thank you very much. And I'm walking away from him. I'm in this like glow of Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. And half a block away, there's Busta Rhymes. And I'm like, what is happening? And he's on the phone, and I was like, well, I just met Mr. Rogers. I'm going to go.
Gotta roll my dice.
And I go to shake his hand, but he had a fist. So he bumped, you know, like a bump fist. But so I felt like a real white dude. Like I totally messed this one up. And he kind of slapped my hand with his fist. And I was like, I cheered him on. But I was like, Mr. Rogers to Busta Rhymes. That's pretty amazing. Like that's about as different as you can get, you know? And that's in New York City, you know? It's beautiful.
Now in comics though, do you,
all the time. I mean,
guys, you just, oh my God. I can't
especially the older ones.
Yeah.
You know, I remember going to a panel at New York Comic Con and it was like Stan Lee and Joe Simon and Joe Sinnott maybe and like 3 or 4 others. And I was with my then girlfriend. So this is about 10 years ago because this was an older girlfriend. And she looks at me and she goes, what's wrong? I go, what do you mean what's wrong? And she said, you're crying. And I had just been crying the whole time, didn't even know it because I was looking at these people who created this industry, you know, and they're all just old now. And I mean, there was Erwin Hasen who like co-created the Fox that I would later on go to draw and write, you know, and he did Dondi, you know, which I still don't understand what that was as a kid.
It was the front page of the New York Daily News comic section on Sundays, which is what was particularly frustrating about it because it was one of the least appealing comics.
It was the least appealing comic, and like this, what was he? He had black eyes and like and a hat or something.
He was just supposed to be the antithesis of Little Orphan Annie.
Probably.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe it was a protest statement, but it made no sense to me.
So weird.
But met him like a few miles from where I live in New Jersey. There was some little festival or little festival. I went in and a couple of old Marvel guys from the writers and editors from the 80s were there. And I look over, Erwin Hasen, what the hell?
Yeah.
He was like 93 years old. He's got like Wildcat prints. He was drawing. I'm like, I'll have to buy one of these, obviously.
Oh, that's awesome.
You know, Joe Staten was there.
I love Joe. I've been actually just bought the first 10 issues of E-Man from Charlton, the 1973, the first iteration.
Oh, wow.
And I've been reading and I know I picked up the first comics version, which was like 20 some odd issues. And he's a sweetheart. I've met him a couple times. But I realized, like, you forget who influences you. Like a Joe Staten, like his anatomy, I realize it's kind of strict, but also kind of like bendy. And I really loved that. And I think he actually drew some of the Green Lanterns that I read.
Yeah, it was good. When you mentioned being a Green Lantern fan, I thought maybe it was that Staten.
So it was him. Yeah. And so E-Man and Green Lantern, I realized he influenced me. Ron Wilson, who drew Marvel 2-in-1, influenced me. You know, and as much as I tout Kirby, I had to arrive at Kirby later because he was always there, you know.
And late 70s Kirby at Marvel was difficult.
Yeah, it's difficult.
It's big and blocky and it doesn't make sense.
And I love it. And but at the same time, and actually he did something really that I have adopted. In his 70s Marvel, I think every 4 to 5 pages was a chapter break and a splash.
Yeah, he would just,
and I was like,
chance he got to do a
splash page. And even it was a close-up of a face, you know, like, and I actually like that. I think that's like a nice little kind of, and I kind of use that in the Red Hook right now because I deliver those in 5-page chunks basically, but the vertical scroll, you'd never know, what is it? But it's about 5 pages worth of comics. Mm-hmm. And so I'm always thinking in terms of chapters like that now because of the vertical scroll and because of Kirby. Gotcha. So he continues to influence.
As he should. But I'm not going to ask you about your virginity. And that was Dean Haspiel. His new play debuts this week, April 10th through 15th, 2018, and it's called The Last Bar at the End of the World. It'll be running at Urban Stages Theater on West 30th Street, New York City, and you can order tickets at lastbar.brownpapertickets.com. Now, Dino's website is deanhaspiel.com, where you can find links to his graphic novels and other work. It's a live journal site, so it'll feel a little like 2002, which is, kind of nice as far as comfort web stuff goes, I guess. Dean's got links there for his New Brooklyn series of webcomics, which we talked about, The Red Hook and War Cry. And those are both posted on Line Webtoons. Dean's Twitter feed is Dean Haspiel, and that is spelled DeanHaspiel. Now, once we wrapped up the main session, I asked Dino, so, who are you reading? If you want to hear his answer to that, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories Show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. The newest episode of that one should be up any time now, and it'll feature new segments from Dave McKean, Paul Karasik, Mark Newgarden, Seymour Quast, John Leland, Ann Hulbert, Henry Wessels, Lauren Weinstein, Jerry Beck, Willard Spiegelman, Levi Tadar, and Jesse Scheidlauer. You can support the Virtual Memories Show via patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for patrons, including that bonus podcast, patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, my secret project that it is killing me not to get back to, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, honestly, this one cost me an arm and a leg. I was going into New York City that Sunday anyway for a birthday brunch with Samuel Delaney, but getting from the brunch to Dino's place in Carroll Gardens was a nightmare on the subway, and getting back to my car up on West 96th Street in Manhattan, I just gave up. I ordered a Lyft for like $40 and just said, get me there. I was not going to mess around with trying to suss out the subways, which were running on opposite lines and all sorts of other craziness. Anyway, the expense of that sort of balanced out the episode I recorded at my home the day before with Dino's pal Jonathan Ames. So I guess all told, it worked out okay. Still, if you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories Show, like web hosting, travel, equipment, coffee, or if you just want to toss me some money because you think the show is worth it, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a one-time or recurring donation. A special thanks go out to John Wendler, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Stephen Nadler, Wallace Wildy Minozzi, Noah Van Sciver, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Garrett Zecker, Craig P. Steffen, Jack Les Camella, Joe Caruso, Paul Karasik, and Michael Janazik for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories Show. We have the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Now, our music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. And that is it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with one of the greatest cartoonists alive, Jaime Hernandez. Until then, you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, at facebook.com/Virtual Memories Show, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube and tunein.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. That'll help us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.